Excuse me. Okay. Let's get into this journey. As I said, there's 19 or 20 of us, but because of the time zone, we'll have fluctuation in the room itself. But I do appreciate that those of you who are here for this this first lesson and the beginning of this process. And also, I appreciate the fact that you've registered for this course. I'm never certain about the more obscure aspects of the knowledge and who is there, but nonetheless I'm very pleased. So let us begin this process. You can see that the heading for today is the neutrino biverse, and these two words for me are they're very important, and they are the bedrock of being able to understand the realm in which we all live out the illusion of our lives and the illusion of the world and everything else that goes with it. It begins with the neutrino. I guess there is nothing more profound than understanding the importance of what the neutrino is and what the neutrino brings. Poetically, I always like to refer to it as the breath of stars. Neutrinos are the byproduct of the life of a star, and enormous amounts of neutrinos are pumped into what is or what becomes the biverse. If you take your thumb to your forefinger, that space that you make, about 3 trillion neutrinos a second go through that space, most of which, 70% plus, come from the closest star in our neighborhood, which happens to be our sun. That neutrinos are all a byproduct of stars is something to grasp as well. That is, if you look at the nature of what it is to be a human being, you will see in the sense of its chemistry and dynamics that human beings are literally made of materials that only could have existed after the death of stars. It reminds me of the great hippie anthem, Joni Mitchell's "We Are Stardust." We are stardust. There are certain elements, for example, in the brain that can only exist as a byproduct of the death of stars, and those elements are responsible for the way in which our consciousness operates. So all the stars of the biverse, they are all producing a neutrino stream, and they're producing a neutrino stream in every possible direction. And slowly but surely, what we have is a dense neutrino ocean, a vibrating, intense, never the same neutrino ocean. And everything everything about the nature of consciousness is that consciousness is this ocean. It's exactly what it is. It is this vast neutrino ocean. Now, I do not refer to the universe as a universe, because I do not see it, nor is that the way in which I was educated in terms of the voice, that this is not at all a universe. It is a biverse, and it is a biverse that is caught between what science calls relative and quantum. And this biverse is the very basis of understanding, the very root of what I call juxtaposition theory. In other words, this is the whole magic of what happens when you bring this and that together. And the moment that you bring this and that together, something happens. And so what we have is we have a consciousness ocean. And of course, that consciousness ocean, what we have in that consciousness ocean is the potential in us, a potential that goes back to the very beginning of the universe, a potential in us to filter the consciousness ocean. I want to take you back in a kind of, it's just a kind of dream in a way, to try to go back to the beginning and when you get to the beginning, go back before the beginning. Because there's, or before the start, there's always this beginning that is there before the start. See, everything that science understands about the universe, its universe, is that its universe is ruled by relativity. And relativity is about the speed of light, more than anything else. The reality is that there is no speed of light before the start. The scientists, when they go back to the very beginning, they call this point singularity. Singularity. And, for them, basically, it's the moment in which something emerges out of nothing. Because that's all they've got. They've got something emerges out of nothing. This is the moment of singularity. Now, in terms of what I was told, there is a beginning that goes far, 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 far beyond and before what we could conceive of in our time frame as a beginning to the evolving biverse. That there is a line of trajectory, because there is no point once you go beyond the singularity to talk about time as we understand it, because it's a construct. There is a line of geometry, and there is a line of geometry that is so long it cannot be followed. But what is clear in that line of geometry is that in terms of the nature of the biverse, that geometry is a binary track. It's a binary track. There are two things. And the moment that we're dealing with beginnings, we are dealing with pure simplicities. The pure simplicity of the biverse. What is the fundamental polarity that is there that makes that bi before the verse? And it is this polarity of matter and energy, or the potential of matter and energy. This is the big story. We know that in relativity that energy and matter can neither be created nor destroyed. They can only be interchanged. We know that. We know that they are eternal elements of the binary that is the very nature of everything. And so the whole story of the beginning, the whole story is, how does matter and energy, how do these things come together? Because that is really what it's about. This is what science does not know. It cannot know. The whole thing about science is that science deals with what is available for it. Solomon's world, anything under the sun, what you can see. And we have better and better and better tools for being able to look backward in time. That is, when you look into the night sky, you are always looking backward in time. And we have tools that can look way, way, way back to the early milliseconds after the initiation of the biverse. We can go no further. It's the domain of revelation. It is the possibility of, what transcendent consciousness or a greater consciousness can tap into. There is something that was always there before, waiting to happen, waiting to meet. It's so interesting to me that when I first journeyed to America to teach human design, I ended up in New Mexico, and I ended up in Hopi country. And the Hopis are very interesting in terms of their mythologies and their spirituality. But what is so interesting for me is that there is a tradition of Hopi drawings of the sky in which they worship a particular place in the sky that they claim to be the umbilical cord of the universe. In terms of what the voice told me, the biverse is one living thing unborn. unborn. The child. Unborn, whatever it is. It's very difficult for us to... The dilemmas of scale come into this story. And it's quite something to imagine that this vast, at least to our perception, this vast totality is in essence one living thing. And yet that's what it is. There is an outside of the biverse. There isn't just simply an inside. There is an outside. It is the ring past naught. It is where we are limited in our capacity. I don't think that we have the genetics, quite frankly, in terms of the brain pan and the way in which the neocortex operates, to be able to grasp any of that. And perhaps that may be a possibility for rave consciousness, but I doubt it, since that will not be of much interest to them. Nonetheless, if we go back to the beginning before the start, and that's where we are, we have this, to begin with, we have the yin. It is my job in this life to be a spokesperson for the form principle. And it is really something to grasp about, the life and the joy of the life and the miraculousness of these bodies and these brains and their capacity and all of that. And it goes back a deep, deep, deep to this root, this yin root, this being design. And you will see that there is a progression in this as they divide. The very structure of matter, the very basis of the form principle. It was there before the Big Bang. It was there in its own trajectory, in its own movement. And there is the yang. And in the yang, here lies the potential, the energy to evolve form. It's what pushes us. The yin is the it, and the yang pushes it. It pushes it. I love the simple. Movement is everything. Movement is life. It's everything. It's so interesting how ill-prepared we are in our sensory system to be able to grasp movement. We do not experience the rotation of the earth. I guess that would be rather painful. We do not experience the speed of the earth moving around the sun, the speed of the solar system moving around the galaxy, the speed of the electrons firing in our brains. There is so much movement. We have this dull connection to this inch by inch movement on the planet, even when we're traveling at Mach 1 or Mach 2 in jets. It's all about movement. It's not about time. Einstein played the game. He just locked time in. He locked it in. He locked it into movement. But it comes out of movement. It's all about movement. So we have these two forces. And in essence what we have is that the yin is just hanging around. Literally. And the yang is the wind that blows in. The Romans had this notion before they figured out how procreation took place. that horses were impregnated by the west wind, which is an interesting concept. The yin, the yin was moved by the yang. That moment of the meeting, that moment when the yang bangs into the yin, when it gives it that shove, when it gets the momentum going. This is the beginning of the biverse. It is what the Big Bang is all about. Is the yang banging into the yin. In stillness, the yin is nothing. It's just an it. It is nothing. In its stillness, like a black hole, it is literally not even there. But the yang comes. Right? This is their relationship. The stillness becomes life. And in the movement, the form evolves and the program unfolds. There is this question that is so often asked. That is, the program seems to be from our level at this point in our history with our information. The program seems so vast. It seems almost unimaginable that it runs itself. There's always this, this insecurity that, God, it must be some great force running this, an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-perceiving. 15 billion years. Now that's a big number. 15 billion years of movement and evolution. See, we think that if you go back to the symbol of the yin and yang, how do you get this vast diversity that we have? Movement. We've been moving for 15 billion years. We are great travelers. Because the design crystal that sits inside of you was right here then. And the personality crystal that sits in you was right there then. Not deconstructed, not shattered, whole. We've been traveling a long, 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 long time over distances that are unimaginable. I know from the mythology that I was given that the crystals of consciousness, as crystals of consciousness after the Big Bang, in the evolutionary movement, how they traveled, how they bundled and traveled from place to place. Being here now. So these are the two basic elements. This is God, sort of, I mean, if you insist on having a Godhead, the universal, all-seeing, all-knowing, get down on your knees, here they are. Mama God, Papa God. That's them. They're the source. The birth of the nine-dimensional biverse. It's a great science fiction name, no? The nine-dimensional biverse. I'm not the... I must say that some scientists, some physicists, have been doing remarkable investigative work. There's many of them that believe, because they have nothing but their theories, that they believe that we are in a 9-dimensional universe, as they would refer to it. The construct is different when you look at it through the way in which juxtaposition is designed. And you can see here that basically what we have is that we have the formula, if you will. And we have these two formulas. We have a singularity formula, the 5 dimensions of form. And we have a post-singularity, and this is the 4 dimensions of light. So this is the way in which it is divided. In other words, it's not so much that, it's like when you think about relativity and you think about the 4-dimensional relativity that we all live in. This 4-dimensional relativity is a gloss, if you will, is the surface illusion. Even in the terms of physics, we know that relativistic law only operates within relativistic domain, that the moment that you move into atomics and you move into subatomic particles, that the laws of relativity no longer apply and we enter into the domain of quantum. The way in which the physicists look at this 9 dimensions is that they don't see it the way it is seen here above. They just simply add in their quantum dimensions underneath. And of course their dilemma is that, their quantum and the relativity, that they find no common ground. In other words, that they have been unable to find a unified field theory. So let's look at the differences for a moment. Let's go to the 4 dimensions of light. And obviously there is no expectation on my part that any of you are physicists. I know that some of you have interests and have done your share of reading. But this is just to keep it simple. When we're looking at relativity, the E, the energy is equal to matter, but it's not exactly equal to matter, is it? I mean, when we think about it, when we go back to the original, before the start, and we come back here, when we come back here, there's only 2 things. There's only energy and matter. And we know that in this case, these are equals, if we can put it that way. And they are equals as long as they don't meet. When they meet, they create something else. But the moment that you enter into the domain of relativity, the domain of relativity is not about working out the relationship between energy and matter, but figuring out why the world works the way it does. And what we end up with is that energy equals matter times the speed of light, that's that c, multiplied by itself. That's this formula. In other words, energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. And this is how the whole visual universe takes its shape. This is the world we live in. This is the laws of the world that we live in. If we go to the form principle is very different. In other words, here the speed of light, this is its singularity, there is no speed of light yet. Remember, this is post-singularity. This is singularity. In other words, this is the underlying principle that sets the platform so the relativistic world can emerge on its surface, based on the laws that are there underneath. In the same way that relativity cannot function unless the laws of quantum at the subatomic level are also functioning. And when we are looking at the 5 dimensions of form, this c, which is the speed of light, and its squaring, which is the whole story in the world we look at relatively, that the c is equal to E. In other words, it's part of energy. And remember the energy symbol, these backward E's, one to the back of the other. This is the symbol. If we go back here, you'll notice that this is the symbol of energy, the yang, the true yang, the pure yang, if you will. The yang to evolve form is made up of these two E's, and you'll see that they break up here. When the yang bangs into the yin, the energy released, what you get is that, when they bang into each other, you have a juxtaposition. You do not have, the creation of a vast universal principle upon which all the laws of the universe operate, but the underlying form principles, and of course I like the E equals me, it's kind of cute, no? Juxtaposed, or E equals me, just suppose, or all the puns and games you can play on it. But literally what this is the form principle, the underlying form principle, the juxtaposition of this and that. And it is the juxtaposition of this and that in the form principle that creates the environment that allows the emergence of relativity. If there is no yang banging into the yin, there is no speed of light. Because at singularity, there is no light. And there is no speed. There is the moment of meeting. And in the moment of meeting only then is the release of not simply energy, but the release of the form principle dynamic. We are the byproduct of that. We are the design and the personality juxtaposed to each other, held together. Juxtaposition is a fascinating word. Take for example some kind of poetry anthology. These kind of books they publish with 800 different poets in it, and categorized by whatever. And you open up any page, and there are two poems, one beside each other. They were written by different authors who lived in different cultures. And there's two pieces of their poetry. And it was just slapped in there by the editor because it's according to the categories. And yet when you read the two of them side by side, juxtaposition emerges. You will find what binds them. It's true of anything. It's true whether it is intellectual juxtaposition or physical juxtaposition. Let's take a look at the foundation of this process, looking at the five-dimensional and looking at the five-dimensional form principle. It says here, when two became four. So let's go back for a moment here and go back here and look at the binaries that are inherent in both the matter principle and in the energy principle. Now, they're written this way so that you can understand that they're a part of the original yin and the original yang. In essence, they're not really two separate things, if you understand my meaning, at this point before they meet. These are the binary potentials that are in each of these aspects prior to the Big Bang. So when it says two becomes four, which is, in other words, post-singularity, once this moves into action, what you're going to get is you're going to get the division of these. So as we move forward, you can see that here we have now the division, and we have created what is basically, a box, if you will. The four. This is a very, very complex illustration that, it carries an enormous amount. It carries an enormous amount of data. And we will work with this as we go through, because this is going to be very important to our upcoming discussions about the nature of the facets of the crystal and the frequencies that operate through the crystal. It's very important for me, for example, in my research, to understand the nature of the five-faceted base, the crystal itself, to see the five bases. And to understand that because everything having to do with the crystal, remember, if we have a crystal and we have the neutrino stream moving through the crystal, that its entry point is the base, and this is the base frequency. Yet we know that there are going to be, because we know that there are 5 different bases, and that we know each base has a different function, that what that can only mean when it's translated into the concretized form is to recognize that each of these facets in essence have a different surface. In other words, it is the very the very dimensions, if you will, of the surface itself that are going to act differently in terms of the frequency that's going to be created when the neutrino stream goes through. Now, it's very important to us in many ways. That is, one of the most interesting things about our personality crystals is that they have always operated through the same base. It is the only continuity that is there in our incarnative process. And obviously, to understand the value of that base, what it means for us as an incarnative force to carry a specific positioning, that all of this, this investigation is very much about trying to figure out the physical nuance as well as the mechanical analytical values of facets and frequency. So when we're looking at this illustration, the first thing to recognize about this illustration is that there is all kinds of information that's involved, and information that's exchanged in certain ways. Now, that's something that's going to be very important for us, because one of the insights that we're going to gain from this is that the differences in the connection between people based on the base of their personality. I mean, think about it. We have already seen, for example, that movement and evolution have a special relationship to each other. You'll also notice in this diagram, which is again, this is something that's really there for your meditation. I mean, to ponder. I mean, we will have quite a discussion through these 11 weeks. One of the things to notice is that the elements that belong to each other, being in design, evolution, and movement, that you can see that they have no direct connection to each other in the way in which the information moves from one to the other. So, for example, let's say that you have this as your personality base and someone else has this as their personality base. There is a connection that they have. The same is true from the other side. And obviously there are different connections when dealing with different bases this way. Let's look at something and think about it for a moment. My little illustration of crystal. And we have the base frequency as we enter in. But what's inside? What's inside is the tonal frequency. And the tonal frequency, as students are taught in PHS and rave psychology, that this is where human programming begins. That is where our specific human cognitive program is initiated. This is where it starts. If you go before this to the base isn't personal. I mean, it's not personal. It is all the bases of all the crystals. And I'm not just talking about human crystals. The crystal that's in every flower, the crystals of birds and bees and you name it, everything that is alive, everything. Absolutely everything. Every crystal has a base. And it is the movement of the neutrino biverse, the filtering of the neutrino biverse by all the base crystals of all the planet. It's through this filtering that the whole illusion is created. All the laws, all the principles upon which science is based. And it is made possible by everything. Because everything is an aspect of it. And of course, it all comes together in a transcendent program that is greater than the sum of its parts. We each carry these elements. If you could go and eliminate any one of these, we have the final solution for, all existence. All we have to do is find all those people who have the same base, and all those plants and all those insects. Would be quite a job, wouldn't it? And we just destroy them. Game over. It's a projection. Life, existence. When you think about the neutrino ocean being filtered by all the crystals of the planet, that every single one of those crystals has a base formula. That as the ocean penetrates the vast, vast crystal field of this planet, a projection comes out. We live in that projection. And the way we live in it is disconnected from it. We live in the illusion of the light. We live in the illusion of the relativity. But we are the source of the underlying principles. If you want to understand everything about the nature of the universe, everything, it's not hyperbole, everything, it's in this drawing. Everything. When the 4 becomes 5, this is the 5th base. Some of you may recognize that I have worn this symbol all the years I've been involved in human design. This is the great joke of the form principle, is that the form principle, that the life principle, it all functions through an obvious illusion. This illusion. This is not one of the corners, not one of the frameworks. If we go back in our movie and we go back to the original energy and matter, this is not there. It's not there. And it only comes into existence when the 4 have established the structural parameters of what the principle of the biverse is going to be, and then out of that emerges this integrated field. See, if you go back, there is the quality, the essence of life is missing. Everything's in place. Everything is in place. Everything. The potential of body and the potential of mind, the potential of the ego, of individuality, it's all in place, but it's not there. So that the moment that the underlying form principle emerges, what emerges is this, and you know what this is? This is the key to living in a relativistic world. We've got 9 dimensions. But in fact, what we have is 4 and 4. And this is what binds them together. It's sort of, it is the agency of the vast quantum that is existence. It is the very form principle that opens up the gateway for relativity. This here is all about illusion. Illusion. And the illusion is rooted in the word space. The time-space continuum, Einstein's illusion. Out of this illusion comes, what does it say? Personality. Personality. A personality that evolves. A personality that can have mind. A personality that functions out of a vehicle. A personality that carries ego. A personality that can individuate. And this individuation of this body-mind ego, that it is integrated in this illusionary place. There's nothing here. Nothing. It's just a synthesis. It's a projection to hook into another projection so we can live in the full beauty of our illusion. And each and every one of these we carry deep, deep within us. There's something else. And I will share it with this class, I think. I'm still not certain. The symbols, these 5 symbols for the bases, they're actually a language. Well, not a language, they're a kind of alphabet, along with a 6th symbol, which is the juxtaposition symbol. And that alphabet literally translates into every kind of number and alphabet system. I experimented with it in the very beginnings of my process, taking words and deconstructing them into the symbols to see, what these things look like. It's very strange. And when I was given that information, it was a way of trying to make it clear to me that these bases, everything structural in the world that we understand, and when I say structural, I mean what we see on the surface, what we see when we go deep into the microscope or the telescope or whatever the case may be, that this structure of everything is in these bases, and we carry them. It's the thing that's so extraordinary when you think about the way everything works. It has a quality of what I was working with yesterday in Rave Cosmology 5 and talking about the shifting of and moving of the global cycles and around, and the way they operate through a lock and a key. And it is really to see so clearly that each and every one of us carries a very, very specific key, that maintains the totality. It's quite something just, from a metaphysical perspective. Human beings are always lost in self-worth, It is a disease of the planet because there are 2/3 of humanity with an undefined ego. Each and every one of us, because we have a predisposition to be unique, we are actually very special in that sense. We're instruments of the totality, and the base itself, is we're holding it all together. I mean, not just humans after all, but we hold it all together. We're not just simply the victims of our world. I mean, we create the projection. It moves through us. And in saying that, you can understand that there is distortion in this projection. It's a long way to go to get from the base to the line. It is a way to go. And there is always that barrier between the color and the line, because if the being's frequency is not correct, if they do not operate correctly, there is no way in which this information, is going to operate correctly on the surface. There's a distortion in all of this. And you can see the distortion and where the distortion is. You can see that there is going to be mental distortion and ego distortion and individuality distortion and, you can see where it's going to be, because these are the bedrocks of the form principle that are being carried in each and every one of us. I mean, we're the ones that are doing that. Fortunately, so much of the work of the base in establishing the frequency of the world is being handled by creatures other than us. Handled by life forms other than us. So that there is this, there is at least this correctness in the vast majority of the way in which the information works. Bases are deeply significant. And of course, what we need to come to is an understanding that each one of these bases is not just simply, an aspect of fulfilling the potential of the biverse and the evolutionary program and all of those things, but one of them belongs to us. And in one of them belonging to us, we're looking at something very interesting, because we're looking at a map of the way we can connect to others. Now, let's think about this at another level for a moment. Numbers are numbers, eh? I happen to be, somebody who has a specific base. Anybody, whatever it is, okay? So let's say that we have, 5 left-angle clarions, all born on the 9th of April, all born at a few minutes after midnight, 5 minutes after midnight, and all of them born minutes apart, let's say, or whatever is necessary in that sense to produce an exact design except for the bases. Just as an example. So we would have 5 people. And of course that brings us to the root of penta. And if you look at the personality, the symbol of personality is actually a symbol of penta. And you can see that there is a specific way in which the bases are intended to relate to each other. Now, of course, I've given you an example that is very, very, very specific. The way, in fact, it works is that if you have this base in your personality, your interests are here and here and here. Because that's what you're going to have access to. And you can see how this works going all the way around, where there's always something on the corners that is being left out, and you have a certain way in which, these bases are intended to interact with others in the life program. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we concretize this and bring these people together and so forth and so on. I mean, it certainly will be an interesting experiment to see. But it's the kind of thing, because it is programming that goes beyond the personal, it's taking place in situations where you're not aware that you're standing beside somebody who has the base that's next to you and so forth and so on. And here we're only talking about it at the personality level, not at the design level, which is another story entirely. I mean, in this, it's I think it goes back 4 or 5 years, this illustration, that I've been using this, and it began in various Ibiza events when I was introducing the beginnings of the foundation of the Global Incarnation Index. For me, this has always been the most spectacular of views. Any of you lucky enough to have an original human design book, the first one I wrote, the Black Book, at the back of that are these graphs. This was knowledge that when it was given to me, it was clear that it was preeminent knowledge. And it was essential to be able to do this, what we're finally doing today, 20 years after I began my process. It was never practical. It was never meant to be practical. This is science at the what we have come to see in the way in which human design works, its logic, its process. And it is really, it is something for us to see that in this illustration is all the principles. I mean, they're all there. I mean, every single one of them. The principles of science and the principles of biology and anything having to do with the form. And anything having to do with the form in the projection that we can see around us, it comes back to this formula. This formula. This is the bedrock. It is why when we look into the design crystal and we go beneath the surface, that we're actually only then able to see what is correct for that body. When we go down deeper and we leave our personal cognitive digestive process behind and we enter into the base, we have a very, very specific positioning. We are the formula. We are the formula. Each of us carrying aspects of the formula, and not just in this life. It's why I focus on the personality. Yes, we have a different base. We have a different base relative to personality design base combinations, and there are combinations. We have a different base relative to, our previous design base. Our designs change. They change. But our personality, the base is eternal. It's eternal. And of course it is, the positioners. The base, the personality base that you have aligns you to a very, very specific geometry. It just does. And as we'll see, the base also has a very unique and curious relationship with tones. But ultimately, like anything else, the information gets through. Think about your body. That is, think about your body graph and the body graph calculation. Think about all of the planets, the nodes, everything that you've got there. Think about all the bases. Take a look. Take a look. This is how everything is held together. It's really incredible how everything is held together. Our goal our goal is to explore each and every one of these bases in depth. And out of that, to begin to understand that they carry different proportional values. They must. Because the facets are different. And if the facets are different, the frequencies are different. We have the language of that. And now we're going to interpret them. My appreciation of all of you participating in this. It is something that I have been thinking about for a very, very long time. It is so clear to me that understanding the structure of the crystal itself is one of the most important aspects of this science. Because of course it's through the crystal that everything happens. We have very, very deep information now about tone and color. Because it's been, the privilege of the last few years to be able to explore those things in depth. Now finally is this chance to go deep into the beauty and the mystery of bass. And I certainly look forward to the adventure. Because we're going to move on to singular basses, and particularly next week, because next week we begin by really looking at fractals and frequencies. I would really like you, if you haven't already in the past, take some time and really ponder this illustration. Think about it. Look at your own personality base. Look at your own design base. Look at the personality and design bases, particularly personality bases, because you can sense it better. Personality bases of people that you know, people in your life. Now remember, it's risky if the times are shaky, because obviously bass timing is something that is very precise. But again, it's something for you to dig into and get a feel for, so that I don't have to spend a lot of time, because it's more important for me to be able to teach you about what's in between, because that is very important, to understand how this works and how it ends up working in our lives, than it is to put my focus and attention on, the basic base information. So make yourself familiar with this. It'll really be helpful in the work we're going to do. Don't be concerned about, by the way, not being here. Obviously, I do the recordings and the illustrations are there, and if the timing is uncomfortable for you, because I know that a lot of you are coming in at really odd times, don't be concerned about showing up irregularly. I'll know that you're there anyway. And it's terrific, and I hope we're going to have a wonderful journey together.